When you have one of these intense emotional fears that just feel unpleasant and you want to run away from, give it a voice, like what's it trying to tell you? And then go into dialogue with it, start having a relationship with it. And don't judge it. Going back to the more fate, right? Like this voice is here for a reason, and say yes to it. But you don't have to say yes to it propositionally or whatever you interpret is the first propositions you translate from its voice. You don't have to say yes to it in the propositional sense, but you can say yes to its existence for being in the here and now.
So welcome everybody. This is, I'm excited to say, the first one of a type of episode, a type of kind of new series I want to start for my YouTube channel. And I'm calling it 3 Books series. And my first guest, I couldn't have picked a better one, is Peter Limberg. Peter Limberg, let me do a short introduction, and then we will talk about the 3 books. And I'll talk a little bit more about the nature of these. Peter Limberg, I think it's fair to say, and correct me if I'm wrong, he's an entrepreneur, writer, and cultural commentator. He has a philosophy degree, and I'm going to mention some of his recent activities and accomplishments. He wrote in 2018 an important article called The Memic Tribes of Culture War 2.0 with Connor Barnes. And the following year, 2019, he wrote a kind of a follow-up article to that called The Hippocratic Oath for the Culture War. That was published in Area. And we also wrote an article together called The Marginal Figure, Communities, Conflicts, and Change. Peter also has a very amazing podcast, the only podcast that I've seriously followed and listened to as a long-term listener. It is called Intellectual Explorers Podcast, and it has over 50 episodes. And I'll just mention some of my favorite episodes on that show. There was an interview with James Cars, another episode, an interview with Glenn Wallace, one with Brad Blanton, and one with Kaveh Zahedi. So these are like the range of guests and the range of topics is quite wide, very eclectic, and shows suggest that the host is a Renaissance man. He has 2 meetup groups, both are run in Toronto. One of them is the Intellectual Explorers Club, and the other one is Stoicism Toronto, which is, if I'm not mistaken, the largest Stoicism club meetup group in the world. And he has, in the past, described himself as a jazzy thinker, a para-academic, and a post-rationalist. Let's just say they don't fully describe Peter. So welcome to the. I'm very happy to have you as my first guest in this series.
It's very good to be here, my friend, and thanks for the generous introduction.
Sure. So my idea is to introduce my guest through 3 books, and they are not going to be, we don't have to commit to the idea of a favorite books, like 3 top favorite, most influential. It's more loose than that. It's a little bit more arbitrary, and it's difficult to select important books. But you have, for this episode, you have selected 3 books, and we're going to talk about them and why they are significant, in what way, what comes to your mind when you think about them. And for our viewers, we can say a few things about why they could consider reading them and what they should expect, what they can expect. And, some spoilers are okay too. There is no rules against spoilers for the content of the books. Okay, I'll let you begin with the book number 1.
So I just choose anyone that we would like to talk about?
Yeah.
Okay. And it was, I guess I'll make a word about the selection process, because I kind of enjoyed that challenge, because I think the way you phrased it was influential or significant books. So it wasn't like the best books. It was just books that kind of impacted you in a certain way. And, I read quite a few books in my life, and I picked 12. 12 kind of resonated with me. I took a picture, for you to send that. And it was like, I wouldn't say these are like the best written books or the, or the best quality or kind of like the broader impact on the world. It's just something that hit me in a certain time of my life that just kind of had a transformational effect. And then so that's one thing of what was going through my head when I was selecting it. And there was another thing that I would like to flag, maybe for your future guests, is I was So for the top three right here, I wanted to put a book, like I wanted to put Plato's Republic in it. And I'll reveal the three books in a moment, but I wanted to put Plato's Republic or some book that would signal that I'm the type of guy who would read Plato's Republic, right? Because even though Plato's Republic did influence me, and it was probably in the top 12, but it wasn't as impactful as these three. And so I noticed sort of kind of impression management machinations going on. But I really wanted to keep it pure to what books kind of really just transformed me, not what I want to signal to the audience. But there might be a little bit of that going on anyways. So book number one is Demian by Hermann. I always pronounce his last name Hesse, but I just looked it up and we're chatting about this. It looks like it's Hesse, Hermann Hesse. And like I devoured Hermann Hesse's books when I was younger. Probably read all of them during like the time of like 17 to 19. And the first one was Siddhartha I read, and then the second one was Demian. And this book just sort of, I almost lost myself. Like I went into a liminal space reading it and I couldn't put it down. And this is probably the book I return to most out of all the books I've read. I probably read about 4 times. And each time I return to it, I get something new out of it. Yeah, I'm curious because I wanted to read it again before our chat, but I didn't have a chance to. But I'm curious and I know you read it, so I'm curious what was the impact of it on you?
It was a really strange book to read. It began as a nice novel. It began as a story of somebody who is reflecting on his life, his childhood, his growing up. And then it kind of breaks. It's almost like the author changed halfway during the book. And we get into almost a psychedelic mode of experiencing. And something that I was not sure, and I want to hear your judgment on this, because it's not really clear if he is talking about actual people, actual experiences, or is he talking about symbols? Are we just getting a description of a person's interior mind, or is it an actual life?
Yeah, maybe just step back briefly just to give the whoever's listening a brief summary if they haven't read the book, then I'll answer that question. So yeah, it's sort of a coming of age story. The main character is Emil Sinclair. I think that's if I'm pronouncing that. And he was kind of a young boy raised in sort of like just middle class German household, and he was kind of stuck between two worlds, like the world of like what light, the world of everything nice and good, and then there's like darkness, and then kind of mystery, and then he meets this friend, this childhood friend that keeps appearing throughout his kind of his journey, Max Demian. My experience of it too, I would say the first 3/4 was just sort of his journey, through school, and he keeps getting older and older. But then the last part gets really weird and mystical and nebulous, and then that I think makes you question if the whole thing was real or just a set of symbols or an inner journey. Every time I've read it, I've took at least the first part as real, like he was talking about real characters, and I never really grokked the last part. So I think I'm going to be reading it again soon, now that we have more time at home, being semi-quarantine or whatever you want to call it. So maybe now that I have more spiritual inclinations, I might be able to understand it better.
It is a story that has a lot of philosophical charge in it. It's almost like the author wants to leave a message, leave a kind of a philosophical conclusion at the end. And even though I didn't always enjoy the style of the writing, I was a little bit upset by the end when I finished the book. But I felt that the following few days, the message, like the philosophical message, was still inside me. And I had it did have a positive, a noticeable impact on the way I journaled, on the way I was thinking and talking with myself. And it's one of the central theme, we can say it's about destiny and finding one's destiny. And that's the moral responsibility. And part of that finding one's destiny is finding one's moral code and not following the acceptable, most common, established moral code. And there's a lot of that kind of theme. Like every man or every person has to find what is sin for him, what sin means, or what a good act is.
Right. Yeah, this quote comes to mind. So So this is right in the beginning. Each man's life represents a road towards himself, an attempt at such a road, the intimidation of a path. No man has ever been entirely and completely himself, yet each man strives to become that, one in an awkward, the other in a more intelligent way, each as best he can. Each man carries the vestiges of his birth, the slime and eggshells of his primitive past, with him to the end of his days. Some never become human, remaining frog, lizard, ant. Some are human above the waist, fish below. Each represents a gamble on the part of human nature in creation of the human. Mm-hmm. We shall share the same origin, our mothers. All of us come in at the same door, but each of us, experiments of the depth, strives towards his own destiny. We can understand one another, but each of us is able to interpret himself to himself alone.
Yeah, I love that. The gamble. Each person it represents a gamble by nature, which may or may not work out. There's another important theme in the book, which is the theme of friendship and the friends that come to our lives. And this is the reason why it made me think about you and our friendship, because you had the kind of like, your entrance into my life was a kind of like you were a Demian figure to me. Because it was like a different energy, a person who has figured out, has original insights about things. Like, for example, Demian gives a whole different twist on the Abel and Cain story, which is like very original, very stimulating. And every person that he meets, almost like there are two main characters. One of them is Demian, the other one is Pistorius, who is a person who wants to be a priest, who's a musician, and they spend some time together, but eventually their paths separate. But each time he meets somebody, he gains something. He understands himself better in a new way because of that friend. But Demian is somebody who stays the most. And then finally, the weirdest part for me was the Lady Eve. I didn't know how to interpret that. Was it like a spiritual relationship? Was it a symbol of Mother Nature? Was it it seemed some moments.
You're talking about Damon's mother, right?
Right.
Damien's mother. Yeah, I didn't understand that myself either. It was really strange. But what you just said there kind of was interesting, because obviously that book impacted me when I first read it, and I wonder how much I took on. Because I remember when I first read it, I'm like, I want to be like Max Damian, right? Like that's the guy I want to be. I want to be that kind of person that comes in and just very like transforms someone's life, and has this sense of knowingness about him. And so I wonder how much I took on that role when I meet someone new, especially someone who I resonate with on kind of a male philia companionship. And I remember you and I used to joke about me dropping wisdom nuggets.
Right.
I stopped throwing those, but.
And I don't know which character says this, but there was another part that reminded me of you was they were talking about an impending war that is going to break out or something, some people, or they're going to be, something bad was going to happen that it was going to challenge them deeply. And they may or may not survive it, something like that. And then he describes it, and at the end he says, good. This is a challenge that we may or may not survive. Good. Something like that. And that I heard similar things from you.
Right.
Recognition of the difficulties of life combined with affirmation, confirming it and facing it.
Yeah. There's a lot of like Stoic elements too. When I was revisiting it, kind of, it's like, don't speak if you don't have to. That was like Damian's thing. Like, so let's do away with useless chatter if we have like a laconic energy about that. And and sort of like amor fati, whatever happens in your life, act as if you wrote that into your life. If you had God mode powers. And I think that is that's something that I strive for, is to have that sense of saying yes to whatever comes in my life and acting as if this is something that I actually want, even if I don't want it.
Yeah. So could you talk a little bit more about the concept of daemon and how this might be related to kind of like an undertone of the book?
Yeah, like I did a slip there in the beginning when I said the book's name. I said Daemon instead of Demian. And Max Damian's character is sort of like Emil Sinclair's Daemon. And daemon, in one of the original sources it's mentioned, is from Socrates. Like Socrates had a daemon, and it was supposed to be his guiding spirit. And it's the way I hold it, maybe in a secular sense, is sort of a color or quality of intuition that has a feeling of rightness, of boldness, and it just tells you to like go here. And it's like your conscious, or you're kind of like your guiding moral intuition, and it feels kind of has a crazy logic to it too, because it doesn't, it's not like a straight path. It's almost like it works faster than any kind of reasoning capacity that you can have. And so that was my first introduction to the concept of the daemon. And that's pretty much influenced me throughout my life and how I sort of navigated in building a relationship with this sort of quality of intuition.
In the beginning of the story, as a child, this Emil Sinclair, he had his own, like he had a sense occasionally that something that was bad, something that was dark, he was good. He was drawn to that. He was drawn towards the darkness. But so that was just self-reliance in the beginning. But then that daemon was personified. It was embodied after some point into a person, another person.
And going at that, just riffing now, and just thinking about kind of the situation that we're in with the COVID-19. And I'm noticing that there's just like a tension between a lot of people and what narratives that they're being attracted to. And one constellation that people are like gesturing towards, like, this shit could get really bad. The other constellation, this is, it's going to be business as usual. This is just the flu type of thing. And for this constellation, the one that like are not even considering kind of worst case scenarios, I'm feeling into that. And my sense is that they don't have a great relationship with fear. So they don't want to have, they don't want to consider scenarios that would engender great fear. And one thing I got from, this book, I think when I was younger, is that it's the light and the dark. And Hermann Hesse was influenced by Jung, right? And Jung says you have to know the devil within in order to like get to heaven. And so if you don't have a good relationship with these more darker emotional states, fear being one of them, the embrace of death, your desire to do kind of damage and harm. If you don't have a healthy relationship with that, when it bubbles up, then I don't think you can be a full person and you can live a complete life.
Right. If you systematically block those desires and those tendencies, because all these emotions speak something to us, including fear. Fear is a kind of a guide, if we accept that assumption. And to systematically and consistently ignore and repress one of our inner guides has definitely going to have some impact.
Yeah. And one activity that I think it's Jung who created it, called active imagination. And so it's like I use it in a journal exercise. So you can do, like, I know you do morning pages every morning, or you used to. So just have like a journal open. And then when you have one of these intense emotional fears that just feel unpleasant and you want to run away from, give it a voice. Like, what's it trying to tell you? And then go into dialogue with it. Start having a relationship with it. And don't judge it. Going back to the more fate, right? Like, this voice is here for a reason, and say yes to it. But you don't have to say yes to it propositionally, or whatever you interpret is the first propositions you translate from its voice. You don't have to say yes to it in the propositional sense, but you can say yes to its existence for being in the here and now. And I think that's the first step of building a good relationship with all these darker emotional states. Right.
So instead of saying yes, it is true, we would say, yes, something in me feels this way, or something in me sees this as true.
Yeah. So I think there's a tendency, like, when we, I think a lot of people conflate, like, their cognitive state and then their emotional reality as one. So if they feel something, it means this, like it is automatic translation process. So like you just said, so instead of saying that is true, whatever your first translation of this motion is, just say yes to the whole phenomenon of what's occurring right now. And I like the process of active imagination, because it's like, it allows that, but then it allows something further that you can have actually a dialogue and see what's actually going on here.
And I think this could be a key to understanding the book Demian. This might be the result of Hermann Hesse having sit down and giving voice to different sides of his own mind, And one of them was Sinclair, the other one was Demian, the other one was Pistorius. And it ended up being that novel for us.
Yes.
It could be a new understanding it. Yeah.
Yes, I think you're right there.
Yeah. Okay. So is it a good point to move to book number 2?
Yeah, sure. So the Epictetus, this is the kind of more academic version. This is the handbook. I think it's pronounced the Enchiridion.
Okay.
Correct me if I'm wrong. But the first copy I actually read of it was Sharon Lebel's sort of more popularized version called The Art of Living. And this was actually gifted to a fellow Persian, Ben Nader. And then he wrote this little, may strength, purpose, and pure thought accompany your soul. Happy birthday, Peter. Your friend Ben, October 2007. That's so I dated when I read this, October 2007. I forget how old was I then, but I was quite young in university. And I was a philosophy student at the University of Toronto. And the only introduction to Stoicism I had was maybe like a 101 mention on like Marcus Aurelius in a philosophy class. But other than that, it was just like continental philosophy or analytical philosophy, and something that felt very, let's say, disembodied, not something you can practically apply. The closest was maybe the existentialist, but there's a little bit of pretensions of how it was presented. But when I read this, it was just like, it just hit me. I'm like, wow, I have a philosophy of life now. Just like it was immediate because I could apply mentally, I could apply the principles right away.
Right. I think the way academic philosophy works, and I may not be totally accurate on this, is that the part of philosophy that stays and that grows inside academic discipline is the parts of philosophy that generate more lines of thinking. And these lines of thinking are not necessarily in touch with our lives. But they're like these mental puzzles, as Johannes said recently in our podcast episode. They're mental puzzles, and it's nice. It's very easy, relatively speaking, to jump from one puzzle to another puzzle. We just tweak parts of the puzzle. Right. But the more we build puzzles on top of a puzzle, the more we are moving further and further from the basis, which is the lived experience and life.
Yeah.
And I think that's common for students of psychology and philosophy to feel this almost like a nutritive deficiency in them by taking all these academic courses. And in your experience, once you get something that is in contrast, stark contrast, it is so relevant, then it's a very exciting experience.
Yeah, 100%. And the term I like to use right now is a philosophical noise. Like all those, like Johannes said, all those like cute puzzles and stuff like that. I view it, unless it's your vocation and you're getting paid for it or something like that, I view it as philosophical noise. And then again, I don't want to be like, use this as some kind of ego trip or some kind of like, status move. With philosophical noise to someone could be something really relevant to someone else. So I want to be contextually clear about that. But what I like about Stoicism, they consider themselves philosophers. They use reason, and they're quite good at reasoning, but they apply it to what's like most existentially salient in their life. And I think that is good and needed. So that's why there's like, the Stoic essence is something that's highly relevant and immediate, and philosophizes about the here and now, about your life and your experience.
So what are some of the themes in the Enchiridion? So the handbook.
Yeah, I should probably know how to pronounce that, but we'll just call it the handbook for now. So there's like three main Stoics: Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, and then Seneca. And Epictetus was a Roman slave, and Marcus Aurelius was like a Roman emperor. And Epictetus came first and influenced Marcus Aurelius, and that's why I like Stoicism too, because anyone, kind of any class, could kind of resonate with it. And Epictetus was my favorite, actually, out of all those three main Stoics, the Roman Stoics. And there's a lot of themes in it that go throughout all three of them. One in particular with Epictetus is the dichotomy of control. Focus on what is in your control. Your thoughts, your actions, not necessarily your emotional state. Like we're talking about, if you have emotions that just comes in, you can't just tell it to shut off. But what's in your control is to maybe have a dialogue or engage with it in some capacity. And then a lot of the stresses that come in our life, and then maybe like the anxieties, come from focusing on what's not in our control.
Yeah, I think that was one of the first things I also heard about Stoicism. What is in our control, what is not in our control. It is really strange to me that humans, we need to hear that lesson. And even when we know that, when we learn that lesson, we forget it and we have to be reminded of it. There's something about the human mind that keeps going back to what is not in our control, which is why something like Stoicism, Stoic philosophy, probably needs to be a constant companion, not something that we hear one time and say, "Oh yeah." It's not an information like, "Oh, where's the exit door?" and I can always remember and use the exit door. It is not like that. It is more about moment to moment style of thinking and acting.
Yeah.
In that way.
Yeah,
it has to be
totally.
constantly returned to.
I like that. And that's what I was thinking, like, how does one practice Stoicism? So like how I hold the whole philosophy is like, you have to live in accordance with nature. And some people with different metaphysics says you have to live in accordance with God or reality. But like that is kind of, the starting point of Stoic thought. And then how do you do that? You become a virtuous person. The 4 cardinal virtues. The first one is prudence. Practical reasoning. So you become someone who reasons about life and then allows that reasons to inform and guide his actions. But it's hard to reason in the midst of life and the wilderness of life. So sometimes you have to return to these sort of principles. Like the dichotomy of control, like amor fati, voluntary hardship. And then when you're faced with a moment, then you can kind of like, okay, you plug that principle back in, and then it transforms your experience of that moment. And so this is why I think like, Marcus Aurelius, he did the meditations. It was just a journal to himself to just remind himself about the occurrences that were happening in his life and reminding him how to apply these principles or look at those moments through those Stoic lens. So this is why I think those like affirmations, heuristics, whatever is so important to be reminded of.
Do you have any thoughts about why Stoicism is becoming popular in recent years, just worldwide? That might be a loaded question. I'm assuming that it is becoming popular, but if social media is any indication and good selling books those are indications, and it is gaining popularity.
So like in 2017, Toronto, we had a Stoic conference, and then there was about 300 to 400 people, and that was the largest to date. So that's kind of gives you a sense of how popular it is. Is it that popular? 400 is not that much. It's a good number, but there's a lot of books coming out on Stoicism, Silicon Valley, and like the tech startup community are geeking about Stoics. Could be just what's old is cool, like how Buddhism is making a return, mindfulness, Stoicism. But I think possibly the same reason why it resonated with me so much, because it just like when you think of philosophy, a lot of people have a negative impression of it. It's like, oh, it's just useless stuff that you just kind of just not relevant to life. It has a disembodied quality. But when you read something like Stoicism, like, oh shit, this is highly relevant. This is highly useful. So it could be people who are introduced to that. They have that same experience, and I don't know if this is true, but this is. I think this could be an interesting explanation. Is that we're living in a time of great complexity. We're living in to use David Snowden's Cynefin framework, we're living in like a complex ontology. We can't predict what's going to happen tomorrow. And this COVID situation is just really bringing this home. There's not like one person or institution we can trust to know what's going to happen or what is actually happening, what is going to happen. And a philosophy that allows you to survive and possibly thrive in states of radical uncertainty is evolutionary, is highly relevant and highly practical. And Stoicism is one of those, I think. So that could be another reason we're living in a more kind of uncertain and complex times. So these philosophies that help us navigate through these times are going to be coming to the forefront.
Yeah, that's good. There was another author that you suggested to me years ago, and he was Michael Billig, He has a book called The Hidden Roots of Critical Psychology. And in that, he argues that academic psychology has gone wrong because it is rooted in a non-Stoic philosophy. Basically, he said that there are three responses to the demise of the Roman Empire. One of them is Stoicism, the other one is Epicureanism, and I don't remember the third one. But he said that Epicureanism is a kind of philosophy that is not as, it doesn't have that strong moral component. Stoicism seems to be very unashamedly moral. It is very, it takes a moral stance. It is, we can say, in some matters not relativistic, whereas Epicureanism is, even in matters of life and death, death is, what is death really? It's nothing to us. It doesn't have any consequences to us because we never experience death. But Stoicism is not like that. It handles issues of life and death,
right?
Justice, friendship, and those matters. So it is something that could be injected not only in maybe everyday life, but in institutions like universities.
It's interesting that, if you don't mind me riffing on death a little bit, because I was thinking about this recently, and I was reading some Stoics, their thoughts on death, and Stoicism doesn't view like death as a bad thing, right? They view it as, they have this cool distinction between preferred indifference and dispreferred indifference. So everything that is outside of your control is basically an indifferent, right? So it's like, I prefer, being healthy and feeling full of energy and thumos. That's really an indifferent. It's a preferred indifferent. I'd like to have that, but it's outside of my control, so it's an indifferent. And then a dispreferred indifferent is like getting sick or a loved one dying, right? Like I don't want that to happen, but it's still an indifferent, but it's a preferred indifferent. And then, when they pursue a goal or an aim, they have like the reserve clause at the end of it. Like, it's good to have fate willing or God willing, depending on your metaphysics, just to kind of like not get too disappointed or get too absorbed into that pursuit. So there's always some kind of distancing going on to what is occurring. And the same thing can be applied to death, like death, you could probably say most times it's a dispreferred indifferent, but then not all the time. Sometimes it might be a preferred indifferent. So death itself is not a bad thing. And again, going back to that relationship with the kind of the fear of death. And I think if you kind of have that primordial, like almost primordial fear comes up when you think of death. It's like, in what is, are we fearing like death, or are we fearing this kind of aspect of non-existing? Right? There's like something, and if you feel deep in this thing that's going on right now of this existence, it's just, there's this like little voice that whispers, keep going. And maybe there's a fear there, this primordial fear of what non-existence is like, right? But if you have this kind of frame, like, okay, this is not necessarily a bad thing, because, if we work it out, we don't know what it's like and whatnot. And so once you kind of train your mind and do like exercises like death visualization and stuff like that, once you train your mind that death itself and kind of defeat that kind of that embedded, maybe innate instinct that's thinking it's bad. Once you defeat that, then I think you can kind of live with more wisdom and serenity.
Because we would not repress, we would keep things in mind, important things like death. We would not evade our gaze away from them.
Right.
This handbook, is it a good place for people to start learning about Stoicism? Stoic philosophy?
Yes, I think so. I think because it's the shortest, and it's very easy to read. I would start with Epictetus and then Marcus Aurelius if you want to start with the primary text.
Any other last points before moving to the final book? Any other point on Stoicism, the handbook, Epictetus?
Just maybe a teaser. I'm going to be launching a kind of Stoic related project soon. And I think during these COVID times, I think Stoicism is going to make, it's going to be quite useful.
Yes. I think it is intrinsically relevant, and but it needs the right minds to come and make that relevance obvious for other people.
Yeah. So book number 3?
Book number 3.
Book number 3. Okay. So, this book right here is a self-help book, Radical Honesty by Blanton. And there he is right there, this handsome Southern man.
Right.
And this was like going back to the signaling about like, oh, like the third book I wanted to put was Plato's Republic because it had more like prestige and intellectual stuff. When I was in university, I had this like allergy to self-help books. It was just completely pretentious. I didn't want to read any self-help book because, you know, it was below me to read such things. And I read this book and I'm like, I judged it just on cover because he looked so cheesy. It didn't look like this deep guy like Nietzsche or Albert Camus. And then, but I read it. It was just like, wow, this is exactly what I needed right now. And so I guess I'll say what the book is basically about and then say how it impacted me. It's just essentially that we do ourselves a great disservice and harm by telling lies, little white lies. And they kind of kill not only our integrity, but they actually, it's like to kill our soul in a way. And his approach is just to be like, just skydive with honesty, like just radically be honest. And that's basically the essence of the book. There's more bells and whistles to it, obviously. And I actually, when I read it, I realized how much when I read it, I was maybe like 17. I realized how much I lied, little white lies about things. And it was all because I was like terrified of being called a loser or judged when I was younger. It's like, I remember there's some kids that had their driver's license. I didn't have a driver's license. So I just lied about having a driver's license. Like it's such silly things like that. Or you know, like how many women you're with. You know, like just really like silly things that like one does not need, or it's not wise for one to lie about. But I lied about it because I was afraid of being judged and I wanted to create a certain impression. And so when I read this book, I just took the fucking Band-Aid off, right? Just ripped it off and just started like telling the truth radically. And it just felt like such a liberating and spiritual experience. And then it became sort of like telling the truth. And I don't want to like give the impression that I'm always the truth teller all the time. You know, this is something that I think everyone always wrestles with. But it almost felt like an addictive quality telling the truth, because it felt so almost counter to society. And just as an aside, my wife is watching like the whole series of Friends from like, you know, the first season to the last season, and then or Steinfeld. You know, when you watch all these kind of sitcoms, it's everyone's just lying all the time. And then that's like the main, every episode is just someone lying about something and then they get caught. And that's sort of like the plot summary. And so these are the shows that influence everyone, right? So it's like our whole kind of society is based off a lie in a way, or bullshit. And then so I guess kind of got addicted to telling the truth from this book. And then once I got read more philosophy and I got more sophisticated with sort of my kind of a Stoic philosophy of life, telling the truth became like more of a moral commitment, an ideological commitment. But at first it started with just kind of like that experience I had, that aliveness I had from telling the truth.
As a visceral experience, it's because it involves a risk, because we don't always know. Especially if we have an incentive not to tell the truth, it means that telling the truth is associated in our mind with some negative consequence. And to embrace that it would be an adrenaline rush, because we jump into something that is probably negative and embracing it. And it's like an adventure, going on a little adventure. Depending on the size of the truth.
Yeah, I like that. And something I've been thinking about lately is, and you notice, like when I started talking about it's interesting. And maybe it was just because, you know, you always get a little bit more. I wouldn't say I was nervous when I started this, but it was just more kind of reserved. But when I started talking about this book, I just felt more alive. And I think when as you know, like I've been doing like kind of all these different psychotechnologies in Toronto, these different debate clubs, different practices like circling. And some of these is like a radical commitment to truthfulness. And then the difference between truth and truthfulness, like truth is like objective, like, you know, correspondence theory of truth, like you got it right. Your map of reality corresponds accurately to reality. But truthfulness is just sort of like that ongoing process of mapping your words to what you're thinking or what you're experiencing. So that sense of like radical truthfulness. And when you do that, it's like a couple things happen. One is that you sort of enter this liminal state, and then you become like Socrates, you know, like, you know nothing in a way. That's like the only sense of knowing that you have. So that pretense of knowingness that I wanted to have when I was younger, to be like Max Demian, right, just kind of dissipates. And the other thing happens is like there's almost like a transparent quality to yourself. You almost you feel like you can become see-through in a way. And then the conversations that I have when I get to that state, when I'm just grounding myself in this process of radical truthfulness, it just feels quite beautiful.
Wow. I haven't read the book, but I listened to your conversation with the author of the book, Radical Honesty, Brad Blanton. And in that conversation, he mentioned something as one of the reasons for why we should tell the truth. And he says that when we lie, we are trusting too much in our own mind. And we know that we are trusting that the scheme that we have about reality, our map, and which is the reason why we get the excuse for not telling the truth or lying from our own understanding of our reality, what has been constructed in our own mind. And we trust that. And he said we should not trust that. We should not trust our own judgment, our own map of reality. Instead, we should trust not the minds of other people, but the collaborative process that comes from each person telling the truth. So if I tell the truth and you tell the truth, and then together something happens that is a good outcome.
Yeah.
Compared to that privacy, lying has that privacy element to it. Like if I don't share the truth, something important, then I keep it for myself. It's keep that private to myself.
Yeah. I think what's that philosopher that Andrew Taggart really likes? Joseph Pieper. I think I pronounced his name. And he said that he wrote a book on, like, in order to truly philosophize, you need to be in a state of leisure. And he's the guy that coined total work. And he basically said that when you lie, it's an unethical act, or when you're not if you're not being truthful, it's an unethical act because you're denying your interlocutor a slice of reality. Right? And so it's like the blind man and the elephant. Like I don't know what your slice of reality is, but you have a slice of reality. And so if you are endeavoring to be truthful, and you're risking that, and you're having the courage of that, then my source of reality becomes that much greater.
I was while I was listening to the podcast, I was almost coming up with a concept, and maybe you can help me coin the term that refers to it. So that the concept of an elephant in the room is when, for example, a child says a dirty word in a party, in a gathering of adults. Then that becomes an elephant in the room. Everybody notices that, but nobody talks about it. The silence combined with the collective acknowledgement of the event. But sometimes something happens, but only one of the parties notices that. For example, imagine two businessmen meet. One is Japanese, the other one is from American. And there's cultural differences between them. One of them does something that upsets the other one, offends the other one. So in such a scenario, we have an elephant in the room that is visible only to one of the two parties. So it's kind of like a one-sided mirror. And one person can see something that the other doesn't. So it's kind of like a one-sided elephant in the room, or asymmetrically visible elephant in the room.
Yeah.
And in that case, it is absolutely crucial for the person who sees the elephant to let the other person know that something that you said offended me, or I am having an experience that is relevant, that is blocking my engagement with our conversation, and I have to mention it before I can continue the engagement, the conversation.
Right.
I remember I used to have, like, in my final years in Toronto, I started to get panic attacks, which fortunately they went away. But one of the difficulties was that I couldn't talk about them. I felt negative, maybe ashamed about sharing the experience of the anxiety because it was so intense and it felt wrong. And it felt like I need to keep it private. But once I started telling other people that, hey, at some point I might start acting weird because I'm going through regular anxiety anxious episodes. And just by telling my close friends about it and letting them know that that's a possibility, it started to go away. It became the elephant in the room that was visible to all parties, as opposed to one.
Yeah, I like that. And like two things came to mind there is that like that kind of asymmetrical elephant in the room, or like the kind of elephant blindness. Sometimes when someone can see it and the other person can't, it's also like it might be impossible to translate or even communicate the elephant, because it's like they come from two different worlds, or their cultures are just sort of like, and it might take a lot of great skill in order to make that translation occur. And this is why I'm somewhat interested in the term of mimetic mediation.
Right.
So that's one thing. And the other thing that came to mind was, it slipped my mind for a moment. But yeah.
It's okay. It might come back. Yeah, it is a very interesting concept, and interesting value to have. There is a TV show called The Last Man on Earth, which begins with a man who is the only survivor of a pandemic, basically.
Oh, great.
He sees himself as the only survivor. Other people come into, but when he's completely alone, we see him pray to God, and he's absolutely honest in his prayers.
Mm.
But the moment he meets another person, the second person comes into the story, lies begin.
Right.
So just the moment you have two people, there's already the reasons for, at least the reasons, if not people actually lie. The reasons for lying emerge.
And so what slipped my mind came back is that it's like, those kind of almost artificial environments where you have these kind of like conversational modalities, like I was referring to earlier, that really help you practice your truthfulness muscle. Mm-hmm. It's the intention of that conversation is quite clear. The frame of that conversation is quite clear. Like we know, maybe everyone has different motivations to go into it, but once you're into it, you know what intention you have to, what's the superordinate kind of goal there that everyone's sort of aware of, and they have to start playing by it. Mm-hmm. And it becomes quite clear if that person's not playing by it. And that really helps ground people in kind of a really authentic dialogue. But it's almost feels outside of society. It's paracultural in a way. It's like, it's not even like we have to go outside of our normal operating systems and then engage in this. Mm-hmm. And I find, let's say out in the wild, like only a minority of people, like kind of friends like yourself, that I can kind of fall into that space without actually kind of having an artificial frame set up. Mm-hmm. But then sometimes when I find myself in conversations, it's like the intentions are different between the two interlocutors. And then whoever like frame is stronger, whoever has better kind of social game is the intention that dominates. Mm-hmm. And a lot of intentions I find is just sort of like keeping up appearances, mm-hmm. or like just a lot of bullshit talk. And then it's interesting to feel that tension there, because that does not lead to the authentic conversation and this kind of the sense of radical truthfulness and the capability of calling out the elephant in the room. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So if you're in this kind of bubble where it's like, okay, we're here to just make ourselves look good. And it comes much more difficult in those situations unless you have great kind of skill in order to break that frame and then introduce the elephant.
Mm-hmm. Right. If the intentions are aligned, then people become more charitable to each other. They wait, they become patient. They wait to see, I understood you correctly, or they check with each other about their interpretation.
And this is why I think I think it's called meta communication. It's mm-hmm. like when you're kind of in exchange, is they're having the ability to kind of go up, call the intention out, and then maybe level set the intention. Like, this is why I'm really here. Why are you really here? And then go back to the kind of the normal mode. Mm-hmm. And that creates that skill set to kind of go up and down.
Right. Yeah, it's crucial. Not just, I think, in addition to the image that many of us have, and we are kind of too preoccupied, overly preoccupied with our image. I think we also have certain beliefs about ourselves that we like to protect and nurture positive beliefs. Like, on Twitter, we see a lot of people who take bad news, like the spread of coronavirus, and they immediately make it related to themselves. Like, oh, I'm fine. Or like, oh, I'm happy to be quarantined at home. Oh, I will read my favorite books, or my favorite movies, or,
I like how your body language.
It's an interjection into something that is not really about them, but they make it about them and about their self-image and positive beliefs. Anything that feeds our specialness, I think, is the danger.
I'm very interested in your explorations on kind of building relationships with the multiple audiences at play when you're kind of broadcasting at YouTube, and when you're trying to have kind of engaging conversations like this. Because I notice for myself right now, there's moments when I'm just like slipping into like what I was referring to as like truthful, authentic dialogue. And then I see the recording button every now and again. And then I'm returning to like, oh, like this is going to be broadcasted to people I don't know. Did I just sound stupid? Am I making sense right now? And then that self-judgment occurs. So I'm like sort of going in and out of it right now.
Yeah, I understand. I'm not so far I haven't been very careful about my audience on YouTube, but that's partly because I'm waiting for them to break the silence and to, occasionally they complain about something like the music is too loud, or we can't hear your voice or something like that. But if it gets out of that crude level and it becomes a two-sided conversation. I have this two videos that might become part of a longer series called YouTube Phenomenology, in which I'm talking about why it is that somebody records himself or herself on YouTube. And it's a very ridiculous act of recording yourself, that turning a camera on towards yourself and turning it on. What does that mean? And I argue that it's about searching for conversation partners who are at present absent. So it's a kind of search for, at least in my case, for people
I like that.
I don't know yet.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And I'm just thinking, because my experience of having the podcast, and it's like almost like 99% of the feedback I got from just doing the podcast was just all love and all positivity, right? And then it's like, it creates this illusion like, oh, I'm doing something great in your own head, or something of maximum value. But what it really could be is just like a selection bias of people who resonate with me, resonate with my temperament, resonate with kind of my explorations.
Right.
And so I just found the others. But I noticed, like, when I brought the same spirit and I did like some videos for Rebel Wisdom, which have a whole different audience, I got like maybe like some, I wouldn't know how much hate, but some nasty comments there, right? Sure. I'm like, ooh, some of them felt like, okay, I see what he was going at, but just the spirit of it felt really kind of an uncharitable spirit. Because it's a totally different audience, right? I didn't kind of cultivate that audience. You cultivate an audience like you cultivate a garden. And I find that there's like there's usefulness for both, because if you have an audience that resonates, you find your people, that's great, because you can maybe get into that truthfulness state better, but it also forms a bubble. But if you go out of that, then it's like culture war noise starts occurring.
Yeah. I have to think more about that. But I think in the case of Rebel Wisdom, I think what they are doing is closer. No, I won't say that it is, but it's closer to something like a business model. They're running something closer to a business. Or a business, But what you're doing is you did something that was, your own choice. You didn't ask anything back, so you didn't have customers who would complain. It's like, oh, what am I watching here?
That's true.
And you said that a lot of people told you that you're doing something great. I think we can pause just after the word something. Just the fact that you were doing something was itself great, because that kind of thing that you were doing is just attempting it is admirable. And doing it well, even better.
Right.
For everybody involved.
And I want to thank you publicly for because the podcast probably wouldn't have existed, the Intellectual Explorers podcast, without you, because you and I have a history of doing kind of mastermind, accountabilities type stuff. And then the first few episodes, I felt great resistance of, like you said, doing something. Especially something in front of other people, because of all the fears of judgment and whatnot. But then we had accountability goal, and so the first couple episodes was thanks to you. So
my pleasure. Yeah. I just catalyzed it. I don't think I caused anything. I have one final question that I really want to ask you, and then maybe wrap up. So I'm just curious what you think about this. I myself don't have an answer. But it was something that came to my mind because the era of post-truth, the concept of post-truth, post-rationality. The question came to my mind about what is radical honesty in an era of post-truth. Do you have any immediate responses to that?
I might. I just maybe, can you flesh out what you think post-truth means?
Post-truth, my interpretation of it, which may not be very accurate, but my interpretation of it is that reality is too complex, and at any given time there are many facts to choose from. There are many different ways of seeing something, and the way we facts and the way we frame the truth in a situation is a consequence of not really the situation only, but it's a consequence of the other things that we care about, our other beliefs, our other agenda, our other relationships, our other commitments. And because of those commitments, we select the kinds of truth that we care about. And sometimes we choose the truth as a kind of weapon. Let's say I'm in an enemy relationship with you, our antagonism, we are in combat with each other, we're debating. And I pick something, I find some truth that happens to be a very useful weapon in my ongoing combat with you. Right. The fact that a truth is almost like incidental, because my primary purpose was, as you said, the superordinate intention was to continue and win the battle.
Right.
So truth is becoming like an instrument. Therefore, truth itself is not the primary. So it's supposed to be recognizing that we are post-truth. I'm not saying that I agree with it, but that's my understanding of it.
So the provocative thought that's at the edge of my thinking is that, you said we're in an age of post-truth, potentially. That assumes that we were in an age of truth. Right. And I don't think we were ever in an age of truth. I think we were maybe in an age of the illusion of truth that was propped up by, what Jordan Hall calls the blue church, the elites in certain kind of intellectual circles. But that illusion of truth could be seen as a weapon itself. Because, it's like truth is not open for everyone. It's open for these people who, spent their whole life in academia and then studied this one topic. So I would put into question if we're ever in the age of truth. But I do think your assessment is correct that it's becoming more apparent that truth is being weaponized on all fronts. Or the sort of like, the lies being posed as truth and whatnot. And so to return to your question, you say, how to be, what was the question? How to be truthful in the age of...
What does radical honesty mean?
Oh, okay. Yeah. That's good.
Accept the assumptions of post-truth.
A part of me wants to say that being radically honest in this environment is critical. And I was of two minds, is that like, Yancey Strickler, he was on my podcast too, and he talks about the dark forest theory of the internet, is that because of all this culture warring and like, it's like if I just was totally vulnerable all the time on like a YouTube channel or whatever, like this information can get weaponized by anybody really. It's like someone who just doesn't like me on the street, could like find me online and then start using this information against me somehow. Or if you get more popular on the internet, more status, then, people are just going to start hating you and they can attack you, weaponize you. And so it might not be wise to be this truthful in this kind of platform that has the whole, it's broadcasting the whole world essentially. So I like the idea of going to your dark forest, going with people that you trust, and then being truthful in those domains and practice that truthfulness muscle. So like sort of like a digital localism. But now that we're living in this sort of like this liminal space at the moment, I think no one knows what the future is going to look like. And I think it's, I would bet a lot that it's never going to look the same. Business is never going to go, business as usual after this situation. So maybe this is the time to be radically honest and truthful in a more broadcast setting. I don't know. But I think it's for your own sanity and your own health. I think it's crucial at this moment. So find people that you can be radically honest with and start being honest with them. That would be my advice if I were to give advice.
Right. Good. And to find people to at least with whom we can create situations where, at least for a moment, for a time, we can experiment how it feels like to do truth for its own sake.
Yes.
To put truth momentarily above everything in that relationship.
Yeah. And I think that is like, the bedrock of philosophy is just, being truthful about the here and now, right? And reasoning from that. And I like in times of, a crisis is that philosophy becomes alive. Like we need it more than ever. And it becomes sort of like dormant in times of peace. So yeah, I kind of really want to fight for spaces that allow for us to do this, not just individually, but collectively.
Great.
Cool.
So as final words, would you like to share something? Where can people find you?
Basically just go to my Twitter. And I recommend everyone have a Twitter right now in this crazy times, because you get like a good source of, you get the news before the news reports it. But my Twitter is Peter N. Limberg, Limberg. And then I have a project coming up, which I'll post on there, and I post all my stuff, and I'll eventually get a website, but that's where you can find me for now.
Great. All right, Peter Limberg. Thank you very much.
Thank you, my friend.